The sun had barely risen over Washington, D.C., when Karoline Leavitt stood alone in her quiet apartment, her eyes locked on the stack of documents sitting on her kitchen table. The coffee was still hot in her hand, but her mind was already racing. No press briefing today, no cameras, no applause, just a courtroom, and a lawsuit that had already captured national headlines. Across her TV screen, news channels looped footage of her controversial press conference from 2 weeks earlier. "Extremist. TV shows don't deserve public funding," she had said with sharp precision. The words had barely settled before a media firestorm erupted. Headlines twisted her meaning. Critics pounced. And soon, a $10 million defamation lawsuit landed on her desk, filed by none other than Whoopi Goldberg. Karoline didn't flinch. Then. She wasn't flinching now. Her navy blue suit was already hanging on the door. Every note, file, and folder meticulously arranged. But what caught her eye now wasn't the court summons or the legal strategy memos. It was a thin black envelope, hidden beneath the others. Inside it were printed emails and confidential memos, documents never meant to see daylight. Internal. Communications between a media giant and senior political operatives. Plans to coordinate coverage. Lists of guests to blacklist. Phrases to avoid. All bearing a red header. Media coordination. Level 3. The evidence pointed to something much bigger than a personal attack. It suggested a pattern, a machine that controlled what the public saw and heard, all under the guise of news. Karoline had come into possession of it only days earlier, anonymously sent by someone known only as LW. She wasn't sure yet what to do with it, but part of her was considering something dangerous, bringing it to court. A phone call cut through her thoughts. It was Marcus Haynes, a senior advisor from the White House. "Karoline, this case is not worth the risk," he said bluntly. "The judge assigned Grayson, he's no friend. And the media's already written the ending. Let it go." Karoline stared at her reflection in the kitchen window. Her voice was steady. "I'm not backing down." "You think this is about justice?" Marcus said. "This is political war, and you're walking in alone." She ended the call without another word. Outside the courthouse, cameras had already begun to crowd. Protesters held signs on both sides, some with Karoline's face, others calling her a liar. Police barricades stood between the crowds and the heavy oak courtroom doors. She walked past them all, her heels striking the marble steps like gunfire. Reporters shouted questions, but she kept her eyes ahead. Inside, the courtroom was cold and quiet, the air tense with anticipation. Whoopi Goldberg sat at the plaintiff's table, dressed in black and surrounded by legal powerhouses. Her lead, attorney Daniel Hirsch, had a reputation for crushing his opponents, ruthless in cross, unforgiving in strategy. Karoline moved to the defense table alone. No lawyer, no staff, just her and the truth, tightly locked in her files. The wooden doors creaked open as Judge Edward Grayson entered, a man known for his icy stare and progressive rulings. His robe brushed the floor as he sat down, looking down at Karoline with measured suspicion. "We are here for Goldberg versus Leavitt," he announced. "Plaintiff may proceed." Daniel Hirsch stood smoothly, beginning with a dramatic statement. "Your Honor, my client is not here for spectacle. She is here because her name, her career, and her integrity were dragged through the mud by a government official abusing her platform." He continued, painting Karoline as reckless and vindictive. He cited viewership drops, lost sponsorships, and emotional trauma. Then Whoopi stood. Her voice cracked with emotion. "I've worked 40 years to build my name. I speak my truth. And now I'm being called an extremist? For what? Hosting a talk show?" Some people in the courtroom nodded. Others looked down, unsure. Judge Grayson turned his gaze to Karoline. "Ms. Leavitt, will you be speaking for yourself today?" "I will, Your Honor," she said calmly, rising to her feet. He raised an eyebrow. And do you understand the risks of self-representation in a case of this magnitude? I do. He nodded slowly. Proceed. Karoline cleared her throat, then looked directly at the judge. This lawsuit is not about feelings. It's about the right to speak honestly as a public servant. My comment was aimed at a trend, not a person. The trend of politicized media using taxpayer money to push biased narratives. Judge Grayson didn't blink. And do you have evidence to support that claim? She paused. Then her fingers brushed the black envelope in her briefcase. I may. The courtroom went still. Judge Grayson leaned forward. Ms. Leavitt, I suggest you tread carefully. Allegations of media-government collusion are serious and could shift this case into very dangerous territory. Karoline met his eyes. So be it. In the back row, a man in a gray coat quietly typed something into his phone. She's going to use the files, the message read. Prepare containment. The trial had just begun, but something far larger was already in motion. The courtroom had barely settled after Karoline Leavitt's quiet declaration when Judge Grayson leaned back in his chair, his face unreadable. The mention of evidence had changed the room's temperature. The air felt thick, as if everyone had just realized this trial might become something far more dangerous than a simple lawsuit. Karoline returned to her seat, feeling the weight of eyes on her. From the gallery, a dozen cameras pointed at her, their tiny red lights blinking like surveillance drones. Reporters whispered furiously into recorders. Some looked confused. Others looked scared. Across the courtroom, Whoopi Goldberg whispered urgently to her attorney. Daniel Hirsch leaned in, nodded once, and then stood. Your Honor, he said, we were not informed of any such documents. If the defendant plans to introduce new evidence, we demand to see it now. Judge Grayson glanced at Karoline. Ms. Leavitt, do you have documents you intend to submit? Karoline hesitated for the first time. Her hand hovered over the black folder inside her bag. She could feel the edges of the sealed evidence inside. Emails, memos, internal instructions, names. I'm still reviewing their relevance, she replied. The judge's tone sharpened. This court does not allow games, Ms. Leavitt. If you possess documents that could shift the case, you must either submit them or set them aside. No middle ground. I understand, she said calmly. Though, inside, her pulse thundered. This wasn't just about court rules. Once these files became public, they couldn't be buried again. She would make enemies, powerful ones. In the hallway outside, a man wearing a government security badge tapped a message into a secure phone. Target has material. Preparing intercept if she exits with originals. Back in court, the trial continued. Hirsch pressed forward, showing clips of Karoline's press briefing. Extremist TV shows don't deserve funding, the video repeated. He paused the clip and turned to the judge. This was not just a vague opinion, Your Honor. She said it from the White House podium. She made a statement with official authority that caused real damage. He motioned toward Whoopi, who remained silent but visibly emotional. Miss Goldberg's show, The View, was among the top 3 most affected by Karoline's remarks. Sponsors backed out within 48 hours. A network executive publicly confirmed the comment created an unstable advertising environment. Judge Grayson nodded. The financial damages are clear. Karoline stood again. But intent matters. The remark was about content, not individuals. I never named Whoopi Goldberg. The media connected those dots, not me. Intent is not protection from consequence, Hirsch snapped back. But facts are, Karoline replied sharply. The judge raised a hand. Enough. I will decide what the law protects. Let's proceed. As the trial rolled on, the tension outside began to mirror what was happening inside. Across social media, clips from the trial were being shared in real time. Leavitt's Whoopi was trending in over 15 countries. News anchors debated it live. One CNN anchor whispered, "She might be holding something explosive. Did you see her hesitation?" Meanwhile, at a private media office in New York, a network executive watched the live stream in silence. A younger assistant leaned in. "Sir, if she reveals those files, it won't just hurt Whoopi. It'll drag half the Sunday shows into it. We can't let that happen." The executive didn't blink. "Get me someone from DOJ on the line. Quietly." Back in the courtroom, Judge Grayson called for a recess. Karoline stepped into a side chamber alone, closing the door behind her. She opened her bag and finally pulled out the folder. She spread the documents on a wooden bench. Highlighted emails from senior producers, agreements with unnamed policy advisors. One note in particular that made her stop breathing. Delay mention of political leak stories until post-election. Refer to them only as unverified rumors. This directive comes from DC Office 7, CJM. She photographed the note with a small encrypted phone. Just then, a knock came from the chamber door. "Ms. Leavitt?" It was a court assistant. "There's someone here to see you, from the U.S. Attorney's Office." Karoline frowned. "I haven't requested any meeting. They said it was urgent, about the documents." Her heart skipped. The walls were closing in faster than expected. She gathered the pages, tucked them back into the folder, and walked to the door. As she stepped out, she saw a tall man in a black coat waiting. No badge, no smile. The courtroom lights felt hotter when Karoline stepped forward again. The black folder clutched tightly in her hands. She could hear the hum of air conditioning, the whispering crowd, the distant clicks of news cameras. But in her mind, everything was silent, focused. She looked at Judge Grayson, then at Whoopi and her lawyer. Her heart beat fast, but her voice was calm. "Your Honor," she said, "I've decided to submit new evidence." A ripple moved through the room. Even the bailiff raised an eyebrow. Whoopi Goldberg's lawyer stood abruptly. "Objection! She's ambushing the court." Grayson raised his hand. "Let her speak." Karoline opened the folder, revealing the first document. These are internal communications from major media networks, suggesting coordination with political offices. Specifically, they reference delays in reporting certain political stories. They also mention manipulating language to protect public figures. None of these documents are classified, but they've never been released publicly. She held up one memo. This one refers to a decision not to air segments critical of a specific senator until after midterms. That senator later endorsed funding for the network in question. Silence. Even Whoopi was frozen in her seat, confused, watching, carefully. Her lawyer stepped forward, trying to keep control. "Your Honor, this doesn't prove anything related to our case. This is a defamation suit about personal and financial harm caused to my client, not some grand media conspiracy." Karoline looked him in the eye. "My statement that extremist TV shows don't deserve funding was not about Whoopi personally. It was based on what I knew. Shows being protected for political reasons, while independent voices were quietly silenced." Grayson adjusted his glasses, then nodded slowly. "Continue." Karoline handed the documents to the clerk, who delivered them to the bench. The judge flipped through the first few pages, his brows slowly narrowing. The emails reference public money, indirect influence on editorial decisions, and messaging control during election cycles. "And you're telling me this connects to your defense?" he asked. "Yes," Karoline said, "because this case isn't just about whether I hurt someone's feelings. It's about why I said what I said." Across the courtroom, the audience was dead quiet. For the next 20 minutes, Karoline laid out her argument. She showed how certain networks, including the one airing The View, had long-standing relationships with consultants working inside political offices. She detailed how language like disinformation, hate speech, and dangerous content was being selectively applied to target critics. "These shows were not neutral," she said. They were protected platforms. My criticism was about that system, not about any one person. The judge didn't say much. He just listened. But his silence spoke volumes. Afterward, Karoline took her seat. Her hands trembled slightly. She had crossed a line. There was no going back. Now. The courtroom recessed for lunch. Karoline stayed behind, lost in thought. That's when her phone buzzed. An unknown number. A voice answered without greeting. "You've made enemies today." Karoline stood still, frozen. "They'll hit back hard. You still have time to walk away. Leave the documents out of the case. Settle privately." "Who is this?" she asked. "Someone who knows how this game works. You win this round, you lose the rest of your life." Then silence. The call ended. Karoline stared at the phone. Her fingers tightened into a fist. They were watching her. Maybe even inside the courtroom? She looked up at the ceiling, suddenly aware of the surveillance cameras. Outside the courthouse, the media swarm had doubled. Anchors from Fox, CNN, BBC, and international outlets waited on the steps. One network was already calling it the trial that could break television. Meanwhile, inside a high-level office in D.C., a special task unit was being briefed. "She's released documents we flagged 3 years ago," said a man in a gray suit. "We thought they were buried." His superior leaned back in his chair. "And now they're part of a federal trial. Fantastic. Do we intervene?" "Not yet. Let the judge rule. If he suppresses the files, we're safe. If he doesn't..." He paused. "We'll deal with it." Back in court, Whoopi Goldberg was whispering urgently to her lawyer. She looked nervous now, the confidence from earlier shaken. For the first time, she realized this case wasn't going to go the way she'd planned. As the judge re-entered the courtroom, everyone stood. He tapped his gavel. "This trial has now raised concerns far beyond personal reputation. I will allow the new evidence, but only under strict review. The jury will be instructed to consider its context carefully." Then he looked directly at Karoline. "You've made your case broader than defamation. But with that comes risk. This court is not a place for political revolutions. I will not allow chaos." Karoline nodded, steady again. "I don't want chaos. I want the truth." The judge sighed, scribbled a note, and continued. "Tomorrow we hear from the network executive subpoenaed by the court, and we'll decide whether these documents will remain sealed or be made public." The room froze. That was it. The next witness would decide everything. Karoline looked down at her folder one last time. Inside it were pages that could set the world on fire. And now, the match had been struck. The next morning came with heavy clouds over Washington, D.C., as if the weather understood the pressure building inside the courtroom. Cameras rolled early. News anchors called it Judgment Day for the media. Crowds formed outside the courthouse, some holding signs supporting Whoopi Goldberg, others chanting Karoline Leavitt's name like she was a whistle-blowing hero. Inside the courthouse, Karoline stood alone near a tall window, watching the rain tap against the glass. She had barely slept. Her inbox was flooded with threats, praise, and questions from reporters. Her voicemail was full. Calls from senators, media executives, even an old college professor telling her to be careful. But none of it mattered now. Today, a key network executive was being forced to testify, and the documents Karoline had submitted would be at the center of it all. Judge Grayson entered the courtroom promptly at 9 a.m., stern as ever. He wasted no time. "Bring in the witness," he ordered. A door opened, and in walked Alan McKay, the vice president of HFY, programming at the very network that aired The View. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes looked tired. This wasn't the kind of spotlight he was used to. He took the stand, swore his oath, and sat down. Karoline approached slowly. This was it. Mr. McKay, she began, are you familiar with an internal email dated February 14th of this year regarding election messaging coordination between your network and congressional media teams? McKay's lips pressed together. I receive many emails, Ms. Leavitt. Karoline pulled out a printed copy. This one was sent directly to your inbox from your Director of Communications. It says, and I quote, "We'll need to delay coverage of the security funding vote until after the speechwriters get final approval from Capitol Hill." Is that your network's standard practice? He looked at the judge, then the jury. That was part of an internal conversation, taken out of context. Karoline stepped closer. Let me give you context. One day later, your network pulled a segment from your morning news program criticizing a senator who had blocked funding. That same senator later appeared on The View for a soft interview. Isn't that right? McKay shifted in his seat. Those decisions are made by many people, not just me. But you approved them, Karoline said. Didn't you? In the courtroom was quiet. Even Judge Grayson leaned forward. Finally, McKay spoke. We are a private company. We make editorial choices every day. Some are influenced by timing, others by politics. That's how the game works. There it was, not an admission, but close. The judge scribbled furiously on his notepad. Karoline nodded, then continued. Were you aware that your network applied pressure to advertisers who sponsored segments criticizing The View? I have memos here requesting a reputation buffer for the show and its hosts. McKay looked visibly shaken now. That wasn't my department. But you signed the policy. He didn't answer. Karoline turned to the judge. Your Honor, these aren't random accusations. They show a coordinated effort between media and politics. And that matters because I criticize these kinds of practices in my press briefing. That is what this case is really about. Judge Grayson rubbed his temple. The courtroom felt like it was holding its breath. Then came Whoopi's lawyer. His face was tight with anger. He stepped up for cross-examination, trying to shift focus. Mr. McKay, did any of these memos directly mention Ms. Goldberg? No, McKay said quietly. Did they suggest a plan to attack her reputation? No. Then we agree that none of this proves Ms. Leavitt's statement was true or justified when it referred to The View as extremist, correct? McKay looked trapped. I'm not saying that. But the damage was done. The jury had seen enough. The headlines were already forming in reporters' minds. Later that day, during a break, Karoline stepped into the hallway to catch her breath. A young intern from a foreign news outlet ran up to her. Ms. Leavitt, he said, excited, can I ask, are you afraid this will end your political career? Karoline smiled faintly. No, I'm afraid it might begin something bigger than politics. As she walked away, her phone buzzed again. A new number. This time, a text. You made your move, now that... The fifth day of the trial began with something unexpected. Silence. No chants. No reporters yelling for quotes. No protest signs. Only a cold wind brushing through the trees outside the courthouse. Something had shifted. The energy was heavier. Now, like everyone knew, they were reaching dangerous ground. Karoline sat quietly at the defendant's table, her hands clasped. Her lawyer had offered to take over again, but she refused. She had come this far alone. She would finish the same way. Across from her, Whoopi Goldberg sat with her legal team, lips pressed tight, eyes cold. Yesterday's testimony had shaken her. It wasn't just about a press briefing anymore. It was about secrets, networks, power, influence. The kind of story that could make or break legacies. Judge Grayson entered with a slow, deliberate pace. He didn't even look up as he gave his opening instructions. We continue today with a closed-chamber hearing. Certain documents submitted may involve matters of public interest, but also national security. Both parties will remain inside. Press and jury are excused until this portion is complete. Whispers broke out in the room. National security? No one had expected that. Karoline stood as directed. A large sealed envelope lay in front of her, the file she had labeled Sparrowgate. She approached the stand. "Ms. Leavitt, Judge," Grayson said, "what is the content of this file, and how is it relevant to your defense?" Karoline took a deep breath. "Your Honor, this file contains internal communications between media executives, political consultants, and a former intelligence official. It outlines coordinated messaging efforts before key elections. It also includes proof that news coverage on certain shows, including The View, was influenced by political advisory memos sent from within government offices." The judge stared at her, unreadable. "Are you saying national policy was indirectly shaped by entertainment media?" he asked. "I'm saying," Karoline replied, "that the public was misled, repeatedly, and my comment at that briefing about extremist TV shows was not baseless. It was a warning." The courtroom was dead silent. Judge Grayson leaned forward. "Why bring this now? Why not through a proper whistleblower channel?" Karoline's voice dropped low. "Because I tried, twice, and both times my submissions were buried. I was warned to stop digging. I came to court not just to clear my name, but because this might be the only place the truth can't be shut down." There was a long pause. Then the judge gestured to the bailiff. "Submit the file to the bench." The bailiff delivered it. Grayson flipped through the first few pages, frowning deeper with each turn. Then he looked up. "Ms. Goldberg," he said slowly, "did you have knowledge that your producers were receiving talking points from political advisors?" Whoopi blinked, then responded carefully. "I host a show. I don't manage editorial direction. We talk about what's in the news. We make jokes, we argue. That's the point of The View." "But you're the face of it," Karoline cut in. "Your credibility gives the content its influence. And when the content is shaped by political operatives, people stop receiving news. They start receiving strategy." The judge didn't stop her. Whoopi's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, this is outrageous. We're turning a defamation case into a conspiracy trial." Grayson raised his hand. "Enough. The defense has presented documents that require review. The plaintiff may respond once this court determines the full scope of relevance." Outside, cameras waited. Journalists tweeted updates with only fragments of the story. Inside courtroom, Leavitt files explosive documents. Judge concerned. Press excluded. Check trial day 5. Check Sparrowgate. During recess, Karoline stepped outside the chamber to find 2 men in suits waiting for her. "Ms. Leavitt," one said, "we're from the Office of Government Ethics. We'd like to ask you some questions about where you obtained those files." Karoline narrowed her eyes. "You've had a year to ask. Why now?" The second man leaned in. "Because you're making powerful people very nervous." She didn't answer, just walked past them. By evening, the news had caught fire. The Sparrowgate documents were already being leaked by someone. No one knew who. Media networks scrambled. Press secretaries panicked. Even White House advisors were seen leaving in haste through side doors. That night, Karoline sat alone in her apartment, eyes on the television. Every major channel was now mentioning her name. Some called her a hero, others a traitor. One anchor asked, "Is this young press secretary exposing corruption, or just trying to destroy institutions from within?" She muted the TV. A knock came at her door. She opened it to find a familiar face. Emily Tran, the same White House advisor who'd warned her not to go to court on day 1. "You need to leave town," Emily said urgently. "Now." Karoline stepped back. "Is that a threat?" Emily looked scared. "It's a reality. They're not going to let this end in court. There are already calls for federal charges. Against you." Carolina exhaled, her voice steady. Good. Let them come. Because I'm not hiding. And as she closed the door behind her, she knew the trial had become something far more dangerous than legal proceedings. It had become a reckoning. The storm had arrived. By the next morning, Desparogate was the #1 trend in the world. Headlines screamed across every screen. Leavitt leak sparks political firestorm. Whoopi lawsuit exposes deeper scandal. And White House press secretary or whistleblower. But inside a secure federal courtroom in Washington, D.C., Karoline Leavitt stood alone, facing the kind of pressure most people would collapse under. The judge looked tired. Papers were stacked in front of him, reports that had been rushed from across agencies overnight. His voice was hoarse. "We will resume proceedings," he said. "But let it be clear. This court is no longer just evaluating a defamation case. We are now addressing serious national allegations." Whoopi Goldberg sat stiffly with her attorneys. Her public image had already taken a hit. She hadn't spoken a word to the press since Karoline submitted the Sparrowgate files. Even her closest supporters were now questioning if The View had been part of something bigger. Karoline walked to the stand. There was no emotion on her face. No fear. No pride. Just purpose. "Ms. Leavitt," Judge Grayson began, "have you verified the authenticity of the emails and memos you submitted?" "Yes, Your Honor. I received them from a former communications analyst who worked inside a media advisory division that operated in secret, one with connections to both federal departments and network executives. I confirmed the digital signatures and metadata." The judge nodded slowly. "Do you know the risks of what you've done?" Karoline didn't blink. "Yes, but I know the risk of staying silent is worse." A low murmur spread through the courtroom. Suddenly, one of Whoopi's lawyers stood up. "Your Honor, in light of these revelations, we are withdrawing the damages request. However, we ask the court to consider Ms. Leavitt's actions in regard to national security and classified material." Karoline turned toward them, calm. "The files I submitted weren't classified, just hidden. Hidden to avoid public scrutiny. That's not national security. That's national manipulation." Judge Grayson raised a hand. "Enough. Both parties will remain silent until I reach a decision." He stood and left the room, taking the files with him. For 10 full minutes the courtroom was locked in silence, the longest 10 minutes of Karoline's life. When Grayson returned, his expression was unreadable. "This court finds that the initial defamation claim is unsupported in light of new evidence. Ms. Leavitt is not liable for damages." Gasps. A burst of noise. And then, the judge slammed the gavel. "But," he continued, "this case has exposed critical failures in media transparency and government oversight. As such, I am ordering a congressional inquiry into the content of the Sparrowgate files." Karoline's knees almost buckled. She had won, but at a cost far greater than she expected. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Reporters, activists, supporters, and protesters all collided on the courthouse steps. Some cheered, others shouted. Police stood in tight formation, trying to maintain order. Karoline stepped out, facing the wall of microphones. "I came here to defend my name," she said, her voice steady. "But what I found was a much larger truth, one that affects every citizen. It's time we ask who controls what we see, what we hear, and what we're told to believe. And more importantly, why?" She didn't stay long. She didn't need to. The world had already heard enough. Back at the White House, panic moved like a virus. Internal investigations were launched. Senior advisors held emergency meetings. A special counsel was appointed to manage fallout. And somewhere, in a quiet, intelligence office beneath the Capitol, a group of unnamed officials watched Karoline's press conference in silence. "She forced our hand," one of them muttered. Another one replied, "She turned a lawsuit into a spotlight, and now everyone's watching." That night, Karoline received an encrypted message on her phone. No name, no number. Just one line. You opened the first door. Now they'll try to shut all the others. She stared at the screen, then deleted the message. Alone in her apartment, she looked out at the city lights, D.C., glowing like a machine that never sleeps. The lawsuit was over, but the story had only just begun. The news had traveled fast, too fast. By morning, Karoline Leavitt was no longer just the White House press secretary. She was now a global name. News outlets around the world ran her photo with headlines like, "The woman who challenged the system and whistleblower or hero." But Karoline wasn't celebrating. Inside a secure federal office in Washington, D.C., she was being questioned by a quiet, serious panel of lawmakers and intelligence officers. The Sparrowgate files had been reviewed overnight. What they revealed had shaken the foundation of trust in America's media and political networks. Ms. Leavitt, one congressman said, "You claim that you received these files anonymously. Are you willing to testify under oath that you do not know the identity of your source?" Karoline nodded. "Yes. I was sent those files in a secure digital package by someone using the name Redbird. I tried to trace the origin. I couldn't, but based on metadata and timestamps, they were created inside a major news organization's secure server." An intelligence official leaned forward. "And you were planning to use them in your defense against the defamation case?" "Yes," she said calmly. "Not because I wanted to leak secrets, because I was being silenced. And the truth matters more than my career." There was silence for a long time. Then the committee chair said, "This information suggests collusion between several national news networks and federal agencies. We have no choice but to open a formal investigation. You're not in trouble, Ms. Leavitt, but your life is about to change." She understood. The storm wasn't over. It was just evolving. That night, back in her apartment, Karoline watched, the news with the volume off. Her face was everywhere, debated, dissected, praised, and attacked. Some accused her of betraying national trust. Others called her a modern-day patriot. And then the message came. A secure notification popped up on her laptop. Another file. This one smaller, just a video. It was sent from the same anonymous source, Redbird. Karoline clicked play. The footage was grainy, time-stamped from 2 years earlier. It showed a private meeting inside a government building. Familiar faces sat around a long table. Media heads, senior officials, and political strategists. They spoke quietly but clearly. The topic: how to steer public opinion on sensitive issues. How to suggest headlines. How to filter content for the sake of public safety. Karoline paused the video, her hand trembling. It wasn't just theory anymore. This was direct proof of manipulation. Undeniable. She forwarded the clip to the Congressional Investigation Team and encrypted it twice. Then, without hesitation, she picked up her phone and called the only person who might understand the danger. She was now in. Her former law professor, Ruth Halberd, who had once worked with international tribunals. "Karoline," Ruth answered, her voice filled with worry. "You're standing on the edge of something huge. Be careful. They won't just debate you now. They'll try to discredit, isolate, or bury you." "I'm not afraid," Karoline said. "I just don't want the truth to die in a folder."